So yeah, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the winter meeting of the Marine Mammal Work Group. I'm going to start off with a little intro, and we have some lightning talks, which are, I think, going to be exciting. I'm trying to focus a little bit in the wintertime on new opportunities to collaborate and new technologies, which we might leverage for studying the various species in our purview. So we've got a few of those, 4 of them lined up. And then there should be a little time left at the end of that for other folks if you want to jump in and present some new and exciting opportunities for innovating around tech or collaborating as a group. And then this is a relatively short meeting overall, just a couple hours. So most of the remainder of our time will be spent reviewing and approving the 2022 plan. And then I think we should have time to begin getting into some of the details of what deliverables and data products we may want to generate over the course of the next year, including before the spring meeting. So that's the general plan. And then we'll stop recording at noon. And if folks, so we're still in COVID, we're still not meeting in person. And so if folks want to stay on and grab some lunch and just chat and catch up, there's a social hour opportunity for you. I'll just scroll down to the agenda here and remember to invite you all to paste into the chat here, the Zoom chat, up to a paragraph summarizing who you are and what you're up to. So that's an option. I know we don't have time to kind of go around the table like we normally would at the beginning of an in-person meeting. So I just wanted to flag that as an opportunity. So let me quickly go over, I know we have a few folks who are new. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think there's a couple of new folks on. We have 15 now. Yeah, so let me just quickly go over resources. That's one of the things we try to do in the winter is just review what resources we have as a group and some of the infrastructure we have set up to coordinate between meetings. We only meet quarterly, so I've put in a bunch of links here for your reference, including the current roster. You should be able to comment on that if you see an error or you need to update an email or something. Feel free to contact me. Welcome to new members, and for those of you who are not too familiar or have forgotten, that we do have a web page and a box note and some storage space on the Puget Sound Partnerships infrastructure. We also have a Google Drive with a bunch of working documents and folders, and a spreadsheet of the species committee members. So for each species of interest, you can sign up to be part of a committee that would focus in on topics related to, say, harbor seals or minkies, as opposed to all of the marine mammals we study. We also have a growing number of email lists, a general one for the whole group. And then as we get sort of a quorum in each of these species specific committees, I've been building listservs to facilitate communications within those committees. I started a Facebook page a couple of years ago. It's been pretty quiet during COVID, but it's available if anybody wants to be part of social media channels. And we have general emails as well. If you need to reach me, you can use that, and hopefully future chairs. So yeah, let's get into announcements. Any quick updates from anyone? Feel free to unmute, and then I'll go into some recent events. Or you can also put updates in the chat too. All right, I'm going to just go on to recent events, but feel free to either, if you can edit this, feel free to add comments or news items if you have very recent things that you want to share. I'll flag that so far this year, since our last meeting in December, we've had the Ways of the Whale workshop. I haven't heard from Susan, maybe Elisa. Does anyone know if those recordings are available online yet?
Hi, Scott. I believe they are, and I think though it's still for a fee, a nominal fee to access them. And
Okay.
our website just went live last night, and there's some glitches with some of the hyperlinks and things. So we still have some things to correct. And also all our emails are down. So if anyone's trying to email and a lot of our staff has had a lot of email problems over the last several weeks during the transition. So if there's something you think you should have heard back about, please, yeah, our email won't be corrected until probably early next week. It's supposed to happen over the weekend, but not sure. So,
All right. No worries.
Yeah.
Well, I'll put a link in there once they're available, or if you feel like adding one, go for it. Thanks for the update on that. We've also been having some nice presentations through the program called the Pulse, and I think there's one coming up with Cindy in July related to marine mammals. I just wanted to flag that as upcoming. And Dave Ellifrit gave a nice presentation regarding Southern residents facilitated by Monica. I noticed that Casey had given a talk in the Bevan series, which is notable, and that John, I enjoyed your presentation, John, for the Olympic Coast whale reporting work group. I'm not sure if those are available retrospectively, but if so, maybe you all could add some comments or links there. Then things that I know about, yeah, any other, yeah, let me just go through upcoming events and then ask if I've missed anything. Next month, we have the Marine Waters Workshop coming up, and there's an opportunity to RSVP to be part of that by the 25th. So we'll touch on that a little bit more, but that's an annual workshop that is great if you're interested in like integrating recent conditions from the past year across all the different work groups in the Puget Sound Ecosystem Monitoring Program, but particularly the Marine Waters or Oceanography group. Then we also, at the end of the month, have the Salish Sea Ecosystem Conference coming up. I imagine that many of us have abstracts there. So feel free to add a comment if you are going to be there and present on a particular topic. Then I think the biennial conference for the Biology of Marine Mammals group was canceled due to COVID last December, I think, and is still scheduled for July 30th. And then I've heard that there'll be an ACS in-person meeting in November, but I don't have exact dates for it yet. Anybody else want to jump in with things that I might have missed in terms of upcoming conferences or events of interest to the group? Okay, super, great. Emily, I just have one more thing to touch on. If anybody thinks of another conference that maybe we should all have on our calendars, feel free to add it in the comments or this Google Doc. So the last thing I wanted to cover before jumping into the lightning talks is just a quick update. A number of projects were funded via either PSP or PSEMP in the last biennium, and I asked Rob and Aaron if they could make it and give us a quick update. They weren't available for this time, so I'm hoping in the spring they can come back with a more detailed update. But Rob did email me, which I've sort of distilled his email into a comment here for those who are interested in their funded proposal to sort of think about how you would do rapid assessments related to noise measurements in Puget Sound, and how we might develop a framework for one of the revised vital sign indicators, which is some sort of noise metric. So that conversation is continuing, but in summary, just of his email, they basically have an AMAR, which they could use to intercalibrate other instruments around Puget Sound, and part of the proposal was to work with OrcaSound to intercalibrate with our continuous recording capabilities. They also were funded to acquire 5 sound traps, which are made in New Zealand and increasingly used as a way to get relatively quick calibrated measurements of underwater sound levels. And then they have a scrappier idea of making even cheaper prospecting kits that would allow sort of point sampling by community scientists. So I'm excited to hear some more about how they'd like to do that. I think they have initial ideas with Joe Olson of our local cetacean research technology for how to do that with relatively inexpensive combinations of recorders and lowered hydrophones. So yeah, the last data product, he said that they eventually would come out of this would be some sort of initial noise statistics from this pilot study, and then beginnings of a framework for how we would continuously monitor or monitor in an ongoing fashion noise levels in Puget Sound. So yeah, that's most of what I wanted to cover as intro. I know that there were other projects funded. So any comments on those from anyone before we move on to the lightning talks? All right, well, again, feel free to add them here. I think it'll be a key agenda item in the spring to sort of get an update on all of those projects that were funded that relate to the Marine Mammal Work Group. So yeah, let's move on to the next section. I know Emily's limited on time, as is Cindy and Jason. I'm actually going to do Cindy second here. So the idea behind these this next set of 4 short talks is to just get a very quick presentation, sort of 5 minutes, on a topic that's related to marine mammal monitoring, that's maybe pushing the envelope of innovation, or just emerging as a possible project that we could collaborate around. So let's get started on those. I think, Emily, if you would like to, if you want to share your screen.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'll stop sharing so you can do that.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Emily. Apologies, I'm at work right now, but I have a little break to present this to you guys. So we've been doing a project on the humpback bouts in the Salish Sea, and it's also a joint project with Orca Sound up in Johnson Strait. So we are lucky enough to be able to finish kind of like the first phase of this project for the DCLBE conference last week. So I just kind of want to go in and explain a little bit about what we did. So I went through and actually manually analyzed some humpback bouts from the 2020 and 2021 seasons here on the Orca Sound Hydrophone Network. And was able to extract the 12 most common calls with the objective kind of to publish these on the Orca Sound website, so community members and also scientists alike could use it kind of as a reference when listening to these bouts, to be able to contribute annotations in real time. And part of that was writing a Python code. This is a Python code that we wrote to produce a waveform and also a linear spectrogram, and also a logarithmic frequency scaling spectrogram. And these would be displayed on the website in order for people to have visual references to the calls as well. So this is kind of the prototype. I would love any feedback that you guys have on this. Here, I'm going to put the link into the chat. So basically, we just have like an overview kind of the history of the humpbacks in the region, and how they were decimated during the industrial whaling period. And now they're making a comeback. And we have this really unique opportunity to kind of study their vocal behaviors from the very beginning. This is the same situation up in Johnson Strait. So what I did was extracted the 12 most common calls, the whoop, grunt, ascending moan, descending moan, moan, upsweep, trumpet, growl, creak, buzz, shriek, chirp, and the chirp. And we have a spectrogram and also audio examples up on this website. And yeah, that's kind of a quick overview of what we did. One of the things that I'm trying to gather is kind of the historical data on the reemergence of sightings. So if anyone has any tips or someone they could put me into contact with regarding the documentation kind of side of the sightings of the humpbacks returning to the Salish Sea area, that would be absolutely fantastic. So I have some time for some quick questions and if you guys have any.
So you're going to put the link to the website in the chat, right?
Oh, yes, I accidentally sent it just to Scott.
Oh, well, he could have gotten it there too, but.
There we go.
Wonderful.
I just sent it to everyone.
Excellent. Thank you.
I linked that into the Google Doc as well for folks if you want to provide comments to Emily. She'll have to get back to work here in a second, but I did talk with Erin Glass recently, Emily, and she's excited to talk with you about sort of how happy whale and the visual IDs could maybe contextualize what we've been hearing in Harris Strait.
Awesome. That sounds great.
And of course, John is going to be a great resource for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Laura, are you raising your hand there?
I am, yeah. So I put it in the chat too, but Hannah Miller is my colleague at NOAA that does humpback whale Puget Sound work for us for ESA consultations. She's worked with John a lot, and her dissertation was on humpback whale. Her master's dissertation was on humpback whales in the Salish Sea. Okay. So she'd be another great contact. I put
Wonderful.
her. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And Alexis, I see that you messaged me as well, and I'll definitely reach out to you. So awesome. Thank you guys so much for letting me quickly present what we've been doing. And I'll put here is my email. I'll put my email in the chat if any of you guys want to reach out with questions or any feedback.
One thing for the whole group I'll mention is that an exciting thing for me this last year was hearing humpbacks for the first time on the Point Robinson hydrophone, which is just beginning to come online. But the fact that they're vocalizing in central or even maybe South Puget Sound is sort of exciting. It's not just a Harris Strait phenomena anymore. Yeah, any other comments before Emily has to run? One other thing I guess I would flag, Emily, is that, what you've built so far is very much meant to be recycled and reused for other species. So that's another thing to look forward to, is like there will be an online catalog of some form, but we're trying to build it in a way that from a software perspective, anybody could take the same code and give it a small directory of files and then create an online catalog for some new species or signals of interest, let's say harbor porpoise clips.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or minky boings. Well, great. Thank you, Emily. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us.
Yeah, of course. Thank you guys for having me.
All right, let's go on to you, Cindy, if you want to try sharing.
Okay, let's see if it works. Let's see, slideshow. There we go. Does that everybody look good?
Yeah, we see it.
Okay. So this is an update on the project that Scott and I and a few other members of the group have been working on, trying to get an automated ID program for harbor seals And this is a collaborative effort with all those different individuals, and then with WildMe, who is the company that has a lot of different software. So they build open software and AI for conservation research. Machine learning experts and software professionals are they have 53 species to date that they have available for that they've trained their AI program for, and from zebras to, I think, whale sharks and all sorts of things in between. I do know that there was a paper out recently that compared WildMe and a couple other Extract Compare and a couple other ones for harbor seals. So they did show that you could use it, but the algorithm isn't trained for harbor seals specifically. And so that's what we're trying to have them do. So it is a platform that is definitely usable for harbor seals. So basically what we're doing is we have two different data sets. We have the ones that the seals are in the water, and then ones that are on land. For us in particular, I'm really interested in the ones in the sea because those are the pictures that we get in our study site, but we do occasionally get them at haul outs. So we need 100 individuals with 3 to 5 photographs each for both data sets to be able to train the algorithm. And ideally, these would be at least 1 day apart, but we could have them with being at least 1 hour apart for the way that they filter the data to be able to train it. The longer, the better. And that's for in between to train the algorithm, because that's more likely what you're going to see in the wild from, taking a picture on 1 day and then, 2 weeks later or something like that, right in a sequence. It's better to train the AI program that way. So that's what we need for the at sea data set. We're actually pretty close from all the photographs that we have in Burroughs Pass from my work here with PacMam. We have a lot of photos that we're still going through. We have right now what we've already sent to WildMe to have them look at. We have about 43 individuals seals that qualify for with the restrictions that they have for training it. And we're still looking through previous years because we have to do this all manually. So it's kind of takes a lot of time. So we will have more. Just talked to Alejandro at Western Washington, and they have a bunch of individuals from up in their creek system up there that they are looking at, and they're looking at individual, the effects of individuals on the salmon community and whatnot. So he, I think, is going to be able to provide probably close to 50, if not 50 seals with the 3 to 5 pictures of each. So that's very exciting. So if we can get that, then we will be pretty much where we want to be with the sea seals, which is great. Of course, if anybody has any more pictures want to send in, that's also good. Now, the other data set, though, is where we are lacking. So the on land, and I just have to put I love this picture because when I first took it, I didn't realize that I was like, what's wrong with that seal? And realized it was its tail sticking up instead of a head. So, it was like an optical illusion. And so we need, you can have left or right sides. Basically, we need for the haul out ones, the on land, we're looking at the side of the animal, more the length of it versus just the head. And we just don't have enough repeat pictures. We will go out sometimes and have haul outs, but not enough that have a long enough time frame in between with the same individual seal. So like 100 individuals in our data set, only 2 animals fit the criteria for those restrictions. So basically what we really need is we need more photos from haul out sites, and ideally on different days that hopefully have the same seals. And again, at least an hour difference between the time frame. So this is where if you guys have pictures from any haul outs anywhere and you want to send them in, that would be great. So we need all pictures except for, of course, maybe like the picture I'm showing you here where you can't actually see most of the animal because he's hiding, playing hide and seek. But if you have any that are animals that are hauled out, again, it would be ideally if you had a picture and, oh, I have this same animal 2 or 3 different times, here you go. That would be ideal. But if you have raw pictures of a bunch of seals on a haul out site, you can send them in and we can do the work of cropping it and trying to match it with the animals that we have in our set. So basically, that's what we really need help with. If anybody has pictures of haul out locations, and particularly the same haul out from on different days and years even, that would be really helpful, because we're very, we need a lot more pictures for the on-land seal data set to be ready for training the algorithm. So that, I think, is all I had. So if anybody has pictures, Casey, you have a question.
Yeah, hi Cindy. I just wanted to put a ping. Scott reached out to me about this not too long ago, and we haven't followed it any further from there. But I would encourage you to reach out to Diana Lamborn, who's
Okay.
a room away from me right now, but she has probably far more pictures of known repeat individual seals than you'll ever need or want.
Oh, awesome.
Because she's been, I mean, we had our long-term study of animals on Gertrude Island, many of which were branded. I don't know how that's gonna, I mean, I hope that the algorithm can recognize the repeat brand, because that's a pretty distinct mark. It's an interesting piece to think about. But even just there's many known individuals across decades even. And Diana's continued to go out there and collect observations, even after that study ended. So anyway, I think you will get more than you need if you speak with Diana. Seems like my internet is cutting out, but hopefully that came across.
Yeah, we heard that very clearly. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Super helpful, Casey. Yeah, Cindy, you might want to mute your video. I think we heard everything fine, but you might be having a little bit of an upload bandwidth issue. Like for example, your video is frozen at the moment. Any other thoughts on potential sources of imagery, including maybe in British Columbia?
I've actually got another piece to jump in on right here, just to make everybody aware. I think after talking with Rob and Aaron and Asila at Oceans Initiative, they might be starting to do some, or at least they're maybe looking to get funded to do some photo ID work in accompanying their acoustic deterrent stuff they're trying to do at Ballard Locks. So I don't know if that's a great opportunity for partnership or something that you'd want to keep very separate or whatever, but just to put it on your radar and make you aware, that's something they're thinking about and trying to do into the future. Currently not funded for, and I don't know specifically what approach they would be using if they were going to try to do it just manually or with some sort of software. But that, and I don't know for certain that they're going to do that, but I know they're hoping to get it funded.
And sorry, my Zoom actually crashed and then came back. Who was doing that?
That's Oceans Initiative. That's yeah. They one of the things, they've had some difficulty demonstrating the efficacy of the acoustic deterrent, partly because a lot of the seals have been exposed to a ton of explosive devices there and likely have permanent hearing damage. But one of the things we've been brainstorming is that if they could demonstrate that fewer naive or new seals come in when the device is on than off, that it could be good at least for keeping new seals from recruiting to that, becoming habituated to foraging at the locks. And so they have that angle, and they're also just interested in figuring out how many specific individuals are there. So I think they will be at the minimum. I know they've been taking photos. I just don't think they've analyzed them yet, and I don't know how willing they'd be to share for this sort of thing, but maybe it'd be a good opportunity.
Yeah, it would be good just to touch base, because I mean, that's the whole thing, is learning about all these individuals and what they're doing and if there's specific ones and all that kind of stuff. So
right, exactly.
Yeah, very cool. That's great. We'll reach out.
One thought I've had locally here in Seattle, Cindy, but not taken the time to pursue, is that there's a group called Seal Sitters that is in West Seattle mostly, but I don't know really how far they reach, but that's one thought.
Yeah, my assistant knows the person, I think, that runs that, so we might be able to check in with her. It's a good idea.
And one other thought that I had recently, but also haven't pursued, is that there's Joe Gatos has done some analyses of movements of seals released from group on San Juan Island. Jason probably can help me remember the name of it, but there's a rehabilitation group, and they do annual releases of young seals that have matured enough to be released.
Wolf Hollow?
Yeah, thank you. I feel like Joe gave a talk at one point about where those released individuals had been cited subsequently. So I think that was a CDOC project, but I don't know how they did it.
Right.
Scott, I think you're right. It was a CDOC project, and if I remember correctly, they had a numbered funny little like red cones or something glued on the top of the heads of the individuals, and that's how they could recite them.
I think SR3 was doing that too. They put like a little thing on it when they release it so that they can see it easily.
So yeah, maybe if they're using photos to get those markers, maybe there's spots, at least for in water seals.
Right.
That actually just reminded me, we are also doing captures this month. The only photos that we're going to be getting of the animal free of any net or anything like that is when it's headed to the water and has a satellite pack on it. So it might obscure some of the photos. We're also putting the funny little beanies on their heads. But that would be a potential source of photos if we're having somebody on site making sure to take good photos of the animals. But I'm thinking that I don't know if the satellite packs would screw up the.
Well,
Yeah.
I think the one thing they did say they want a lot of varied backgrounds and stuff. The more different the photos can be, like with beach or rock or whatever, it helps to make sure that the algorithm is only picking out the spots of the seal versus everything else. So I think it would actually be beneficial.
Okay, yeah, and that could actually, mimic a situation in which part of the animal's obscured, I guess.
Exactly.
Something like that. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm
that'd be
happy to
great.
share those.
Okay, I'll put my email in the chat.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Cindy. And I'll just Diana is the keeper of all of our photos anyway. So if you're reaching out to her, and I'll talk with her after this meeting, but we could funnel them all to you through the same channel.
Yeah, that'd be perfect. Awesome. Thanks, Casey.
And thank you, Cindy. I'll just add that one thing that has really impressed me about the Wild Me work with whale sharks is that, in certain areas, they've got a nice way of estimating abundance, like as the number of new images that don't match from the AI's trained algorithm decreases, and you get fewer and you get more and more matches, successful matches, you start to ask them to an estimate of the total number of individuals in the population in a certain area. So I'm not sure if we can get there, but someday maybe for subregions of Puget Sound, this may give us a bit more granularity and ability to monitor abundance over
That'd be
time.
very cool. Yeah.
So yeah, I hope it works out, and thanks for all the suggestions, folks.
Yes, thank you very much.
So let's go on to you, Jason. You want to try sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Scott, for asking me to update on our project. Let me see if I can get this in. Oh, let's see. And I'm going to try. That, and then. So Scott, are you seeing the presentation mode, the PowerPoint?
Yeah, we see your title slide. Sweet,
awesome, great. Okay, so I guess diving right into it, in terms of the Puget Sound CAB or Coastal Acoustic Buoy project, this is really a proof of concept of the technology. So just as a little bit of background, the technology, the reason why sometimes you'll see the CAB with an OW at the end, that's for in terms of cabal, is this technology was originally developed for detecting right whales around pile driving, construction of offshore wind farms on the East Coast. So that OW is offshore wind. Clearly, this is not for offshore wind. We've repurposed it for local waters here in the Salish Sea. So really, it's this proof of concept, detecting and estimating bearings to southern residents and measuring ambient noise levels. So this is just a 3.5 month project. We deployed 1st of February. We just serviced it earlier this week, which was just bringing it back up to the surface and replacing the batteries. And then we'll recover in early June. And so on the right is the schematic there of the layout of the system. The batteries, the hydrophones, 3 hydrophones on the bottom, and then the electronics. So basically, it's a Linux computer and a soundboard that are processing the audio data in real time, and then also storing it as well as raw audio. The current setup for those hydrophones are 2 meters apart. We're probably going to have to reassess that for southern residents. The 2 meters spacing is based on detecting or calculating bearings to North Atlantic right whale upcalls, which are lower frequency than killer whale calls. So we'll probably move those in a little bit better to improve some of our bearing estimates. From there, it goes up a data cable up to the surface. The floaty things that you see in the middle are really about isolating the bottom lander and the acoustics from movement of the surface float on the surface. So, everything we try to do with these buoys is try to make them as acoustically quiet as possible. So like, for example, the hydrophones on the bottom are covered with flow shields. And, every piece of metal that is in contact with another piece of metal is, wrapped in tape and other things like that to minimize chinking noise and stuff like that. And then the data sent to the surface in this particular layout, we've got it with a cell modem. So detections and noise measurements are sent through via that cell modem to our server, and then we can also access some of the audio files as well. So we basically queue those up to send those through when we want to check a detection. This is just a time lapse of our deployment. In February, so we basically take that float, the mooring, put it over the side first, feed the cable out, lift the mooring package the lander, and lower it to the bottom. So that lander is about 1,000 pounds, and we have an acoustic release that we trigger, and then we just pull the line back up. To recover it, we actually use the data cable. It's a reinforced data cable, so we use some climb grips, which are kind of like Jumar devices if you climb, to haul those back up. In terms of updates, detections, southern residents have not been in the Puget Sound since we deployed it. We have been getting other cool things, well, at least some cool things. So we got these sea lions. I don't know if you can hear that or not. Coursing around. We've had things, your classic things like some singing props from ships passing by, and then that bottom spectrogram is just someone using an acoustic release, actually the same model of acoustic release that we use for our work, but you can just see the individual pings as the surface unit is talking to the acoustic release on the bottom. And then, as I said, we haven't gotten any southern resident detections to date, and that's because they've been up north. They've been going up into the Strait of Georgia. So we had another unit out at Point Roberts, same exact unit, and have detected southern residents, specifically JPOD up there, and also we detected them on some of our other hydrophones up in Burrard Inlet as well over the winter. So it seems like JPOD is actually doing forays up into the Strait of Georgia fairly regularly in the last couple of years. So I'll just play this short one as well. You can see a lot of clicks and then some whistles in there as well. So yeah, like I said, so this was JPOD detection in I think it was a couple days before Christmas this past winter up at Point Roberts. Yeah, so let me see if I can, how do I get back to here? Stop sharing screen. Yeah, so the idea right now, so just to be clear in terms of the data flow, as I said, data are processed in real time on board, and then small snippets of the information about the detections, the bearings, and then the noise measurements are sent through via that cell modem. So typically it's not streaming raw audio. When we do have, basically, we're sort of working right now in 20-minute periods. So if there's a series of detections in a 20-minute period, we've got an automatic queue that basically says, okay, find the minute in that 20 minutes that has the most number of detections, and let's queue up that 1-minute file to be pulled over to our server so that then we can validate it at that point. So our work going forward, we're really focusing on trying to figure out how to package those data and the detections in a way that they can interact with other classifiers and things like that. So Scott, you and I have had initial conversations about that. We've had some conversations with Ruth's group up at UBC and Dalhousie, and then also some conversations with the RAS notification system as well, to try to see how we can feed these data into other people's classifiers and notification systems and stuff like that. We're also working on improving the bearing estimates, as I said. We'll be deploying a cabled system with the same electronics at Limekiln to basically provide a cabled test bed where comms is a lot easier, so that we're not going either through cell or radio, just to get that technical hurdle out of the way, or just makes it easier for rapid testing and stuff. And then building up our next, so as I said, we've removed the buoy from Point Roberts. That was a DFO project. And then we'll be putting it out at Carmena Point this summer for them for 3 months or so. So Carmena Point's right out at the entrance to the Strait of Juan de Fuca. So like I said, trying to spend this spring and summer focused on how we get the data packaged and shunted onto others, and getting the bearings and things like that more accurate, so that then we can start not just detecting, but also inferring sort of direction of movement and stuff like that from passing whales.
Awesome. Thank you for the summary, Jason. Any comments or questions? I have one, Jason.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the possibility of sort of getting calibrated measurements from the cab, and just thinking about how we can connect up with Rob's efforts and Rob and Aaron's efforts to start getting more calibrated measurements more often in more places around Puget Sound?
Yeah, so before every deployment, we calibrate the hydrophones before putting them in. So they're calibrated. You know, we use a piston phone at 250 hertz, and so the systems are calibrated before they go in. So yeah, we're pretty confident in those noise measurements. Right now, we're using HTI 96 mins on those. Again, largely as a sort of an after fact of or an afterthought, or what of the consequence of working on right whales initially. So we'll probably upgrade those probably to one of the HTI 99 HF hydrophones, but still continue to calibrate the system so that we can measure ambient noise levels accurately. Yeah, and so if this were co-located with other acoustic systems that needed calibrating, that can certainly be done.
I'm not totally sure if it made it clear, but the cab that you're talking about is deployed just off of shoreline, right?
Sorry, yeah, yes. Yeah, it's off of shoreline. It's literally from the land side, it's just north of 145th, which is just north of the Seattle city limits. Just happened that permitting was slightly easier from shoreline than it was through Seattle.
Yeah, I'm starting to think that maybe an acoustics committee could help coordinate this a little bit more, but can you just, I know that you're in the water for a little while for this first test deployment. Do you have plans to keep a cab later or more in central Puget Sound?
Well, we hope to, yeah. I mean, as I said, this was a proof of concept. It's a self-funded project with King County graciously providing the vessel for deployments and recoveries. So we're definitely interested in trying to use this, as we've talked about, Scott, of trying to infill in areas where it's harder to get sort of cabled systems in to help monitor ambient noise levels and try to be able to detect, killer whales when they do come in real time or at least near real time.
Okay, well, take a look at the comment like associated with Rob up above. Like what he emailed this morning started to hint at timing and like how long. I think he's imagining starting to deploy sound traps in June. But prior to that, I had forgotten they have an AMR on hand. So maybe there are opportunities while you're still in the water to intercalibrate with his system that he plans to move around to the Orca sound nodes.
Cool.
Right. I guess any other thoughts or questions before we go on to my little spiel? All right. Thanks again, Jason. That's exciting that you got that in the water so quickly and that it's working.
Thanks.
So what I wanted to talk about is some sort of give you a preview. You all still see my screen? I think I've got it back up.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I just want to get a little bit about something I'll speak for in a panel about at the Sailor Sea Ecosystem Conference, which is a data cooperative, a decentralized store of data related to marine species location, occurrence data, and it's something that we've built as a prototype. We applied for PSEMP funding but didn't get it, so this has been a self-funded effort of a small group of organizations. So I wanted to give you a preview of it and just sort of get your initial thoughts about how it might be useful for monitoring going forward across the Sailor Sea. So let me start with a number of web pages that I guess I could have distilled into a quick deck, but at this point, a lot of what I've been thinking about is rapidly evolving and is really usually deployed in some fashion as a web page. So let me just give you a tour of a couple of web pages, and then I'll come back to the sort of the context here. The goals of this project, though, I'll touch on briefly, were basically just to set the stage for technology helping us share data better across the work groups within PSEMP, but also ideally with some of our colleagues in Canada, like Anna and Andrew and Jared. So that's the main goal. It could just be an archive, like we all have archives of occurrence data, but it could just be a way to pull those together so that they're more accessible. But what we wanted to do, at least initially, was try to take on the challenge of making this decentralized database work in real time so that you'd have the option of real-time presence absence information, sharing it more efficiently. And for us, in whether the occurrence is based on acoustic detection or visual detection, we see a growing need for notifications that can be customized for real-time management or research in different parts of Puget Sound in the Sailor Sea. And lastly, like as I'll show you, like there are a rapidly exploding ecosystem of spatial analytic tools and visualization tools. So I just feel like this is an interesting time to build these kinds of prototypes and think creatively about how we could use them to monitor our ecosystem. So the first thing I wanted to show you is, I started as an oceanographer and the Southern residents turned me into a bioacoustician. So at the University of Washington and also in Canada, there are efforts to model and monitor the physical and chemical oceanography of the Sailor Sea and the Northeast Pacific that have advanced a lot in the last decade. And the one thing I wanted to show you all is Live Ocean, which is a three-dimensional numerical model of this domain, which includes the entire Sailor Sea and the bounds on the Sailor Sea oceanography at each end of Vancouver Island. And so this is not just a nowcast, it's a forecast. So for things like temperature and currents, every day the model runs and then attempts to forecast the next 3 days of physical oceanographic conditions. So here's an example of today's forecast of the next 3 days of currents. These are surface currents, but the model is three-dimensional, so you could get the currents at any particular isobath or depth. So I just wanted to flag that exists, and it's exists to the point of forecasting phytoplankton abundance. So we have the beginnings of a forecast of biological oceanography in the Salar Sea. And so that sets the stage, I think, for starting to be able to visualize both in real time and in the future, like what are the biological conditions and how are each part of the ecosystem responding to it. So I see future coming connections with the historic efforts to model the ecosystem in Puget Sound. Second thing I wanted to point out is that we have a lot of community science efforts in Puget Sound on both sides of the border, and they've been exploding recently with more and more visual sighting and engagement of the public. And I think that, it feels like it's exploding and there's a lot of it and it's getting almost overwhelming, but we're actually way behind the birds people and even the frog people. This shows you for data aggregated from various community science apps like eBird and others, what you can eventually get once your observer density is high enough. These kinds of visualizations of the occurrence of birds are, I think, pretty inspirational. Another example of why I think this is a good time to think about this topic is that more and more technology from our phones basically is making it easy to be a community science or to gather data. And so what normally would have been the purview of government funded or academic researchers is increasingly in the hands, literally, of community scientists and naturalists. So I wanted to point to this. Aaron Gless, who's now the ED of the PWWA, just published this this month. But it's a really interesting look at many of the species that we study, but from the perspective of the Pacific Whale Watch Association's app, which has been used a lot in the last couple of years. So there's 13,000 data points that you can get glimpses of, but are generally siloed unless you make a data request or ask to collaborate with them. So that I just wanted to segue to before the whale report alert system was a thing or recommended within the Southern Resident Killer Whale Task Force, I had been looking at the integration of acoustic detections with visual detections on the East Coast. And here's an example of a NOAA and Eastern Seaboard Canada site that is aggregating real-time data from both buoys, gliders, and then visual detections from various sources, either opportunistic surveys or effort surveys on the East Coast. And so this is the last 14 days of sightings on the East Coast or acoustic detections. So the infrastructure for providing these to the public and in real time is increasingly available. And many of these implementations are open source software, so it's pretty easy to replicate this type of site. And that same group that has put together those sites with NOAA aimed at right whale conservation is also now working in California. I think overlaps a little bit with John, but in the Channel Islands region and out off San Francisco, there's good examples of visual sighting efforts being integrated with buoys that Hui has designed with support from the Benioff Institute. And these are generating lots of visual sightings and some acoustic sightings and interfaces like this that allow you to explore the data set, toggle on and off different parts of it, and then sort it temporally too. So it's just another example of the types of visualizations you can get if you are starting to surface these data on with existing tools. So that's the long introduction to the prototype, which I'm showing you here. This is a cartia named after one of the more abundant zooplankton. And the idea of this is that it's an experiment in trying to share animal location data all the way from zooplankton up to killer whales. motivated initially by killer whale conservation, but its geographic scope is the range of the southern resident killer whales. But I think a subset of that domain in the Salish Sea could be useful for understanding our local ecosystem dynamics. So this just shows you the last 7 days of data. And you can see that most of the data is here in Puget Sound, because this initially was built as an experiment of Orca Network and its sighting network around Whidbey Island, and Orca Sound with our 2 locations here in Admiralty Inlet, and one coming location here at Sunset Beach between Edmonds and Mukilteo. So happy to answer questions about this and talk more about it, but basically these are real-time locations of mostly gray whales, humpbacks, and Biggs killer whales. And so you can explore that, and just know that this is very bleeding edge and experimental, but it is also operational, and it's one way that Orca Sound and Orca Network are trying to share our data with end users like the Whale Report alert system in Canada and the oil spill response efforts here in Washington. So yeah, the last thing I wanted to share is the real-time aspect of this is important for some sorts of dynamic mitigation, but Ruth Joy's group at Simon Fraser University is also starting to do what I imagined might be a nice complement to the live ocean effort, which is to forecast the movement of particular marine mammals. And in this case, they have, for this domain, which is just a subset of the Salish Sea, they have a movement model that's operational and ready to receive real-time data from hydrophones. In this case, they've put hydrophones on the map, but they're not connected in terms of real-time data yet. But the stage is definitely set for that. And this is a real-time map in the sense that these ships, each of these ship markers is a current location of a ship right now. So I just wanted to, that's my little tour, and I'm happy to take a few questions if anybody has them. And I know that was a lot, but if you want to explore those some more, I did put links into the Google Doc, and I think I'll be reaching out to some of you. Like I've started talking with you, Brad, a little bit about the satellite tracks, and most of the southern resident killer whale movement model is based on inland data, and mostly data up in the area of that, well, so far only data in that model domain I showed you for Ruth's tool. But I think the statistical methods and the code, the R code behind that initial model could easily be extended to the full range of the southern residents if we had more southern resident killer whale tracks for them to work with in that broader region. So yeah, I think that's most of what I wanted to say. We have, yeah, feel free to drop me comments either in the chat or via email. The other thing I wanted to flag here, I think Monica's still on the call, is in thinking about occupancy metrics, like one way to approach that in the long term would be to start pulling together, as you have, Monica, like data from all available sources. And so I like what you've done so far with like Biggs occupancy estimation, and I'm hoping that if we had a data cooperative that had, say, like all the humpback information from all available sources, that we could use the same sort of methods that you've used to estimate similar metrics for other species. Hoping that that's something we can talk about a bit more in the spring meeting.
Yeah, Scott, Monica here. Are you working with the Resolve group? They've recently reached out to me. I'm wondering if you could speak about that at all.
Yeah. So if we go back to the Akarsha page. Where is it? This about page has links to this, the Australian group that helped us build this data cooperative. The Conserve.io group, which is based in Florida, that is behind Whale Alert and those Eastern Seaboard tools I showed you, as well as the ones in California. Orca Network and Orca Sound were the initial data providers for acoustics and visual, and Resolve was in charge of helping us all figure out how to share better. So yes, we were their phase 1 partners, and they are interested in extending this tool to other parts of Puget Sound. So I think they're starting to reach out to other data providers and end users to see how to set the stage for more collaboration. So that's Maria and Grace at Resolve Conservation. The other thing I might flag is they helped us develop the initial guidelines for sort of what does it mean to be part of this cooperative, either as a data provider or a data user. And honestly, the technology is cool, and I could talk for a long time about how it works, but to the extent that I understand decentralized databases. But the hard part is figuring out, the basic governance of the data, as well as its provenance. So that's the specialty of Resolve Conservation. Does that answer your question, Monica?
Yeah, thanks.
All right, so it's 5 after 11. We have 10 minutes here. I guess I wanted to open the floor to any other news or collaboration opportunities that folks wanted to flag. All right, I did extend an invitation to John and Holly because they have been using some AI to speed up the analysis of their drone imagery. And I think that could play in nicely to one of the other parts of the vital sign revisions we've been asked to help with, which is ancillary measures related to southern resident killer whales. So I'll try to invite them to present on that at the next meeting. I think that stands out as a really interesting use of innovative technology. Also, I know Erin Gless isn't part of the work group anymore, but I've really admired how she's used Happy Whale to understand humpback movements, specifically, the migratory patterns of the humpbacks that we're hearing here in Puget Sound. So that's another example. If you haven't used Happy Whale, it's a mobile app that allows you to submit or a desktop app that lets you submit an image of the humpback fluke and get an automated identification of the individual. So, similar to what Cindy talked about, but for humpback flukes. Yeah, I guess the only other thing I was curious about, and I know I've been asking you about this a bit, John, is if there's a way to take all of this community science infrastructure has grown up around monitoring southern resident killer whale presence, but also other species increasingly, and try to move beyond opportunistic sightings to effort surveys by trained community scientists. So that's another place I'm feeling in my gut that there's room for innovation and coordination. And I wondered if we could just quickly review the current effort surveys or inspirational effort surveys, and at least start discussing whether there's a role for community scientists within that framework.
And Scott, maybe I'll just make a couple of quick points related to that. At Cascadia, this is John at Cascadia, we've made long use of both putting kind of interns on whale watch boats, Island Adventures, and now Puget Sound Express. We had one of our biologists do ride-alongs on some of the cargo ships transiting between U.S. ports down the coast. I mean, I think there are a bunch of really good directions. Ironically, I sort of find myself lately, I seem to be playing the role of as people get excited about these apps, whether it's citing apps or reporting apps, is being the voice to keep reminding people of the extreme biases and limitations that come with where that effort is occurring, and how especially things like citing maps or distribution maps are incredibly misleading when you look at them based on that. And so I just want to point out, we work closely in the Cascadia Humpback Whale Catalog, was actually one of the foundational catalogs in Happy Whale for the West Coast, to kind of seed it and start it. And we work closely with Ted Cheeseman on that. But I guess maybe launching into your point, I do think that's just critical. We always keep in mind what these data sets are, where they come from, what their limitations are. I would say that in our surveys, what we see now, and this is sort of launching into your questions, as we try to think about research surveys, we almost start to think about where can we, address or complement or cover some of those areas that, are getting missed in surveys. And, for us with humpback whales, that means the outer coast of Washington, that means the western Strait of Juan de Fuca. Those are the areas where there's much less human activity and, reporting that occurs, both in terms of sightings and in terms of gathering things like photo IDs, that play a key role. So anyway, I just wanted to make those points. I think they're good directions, but I think, all of us that, every time we try to think about using these or expanding these, we just always have to do that with that framework in mind, because I know a lot of managers, and this is where hear this and they think, oh, good, we can know everything about where the humpback whales are from these public sightings. And it's like, no, not really. You get one snapshot of where humans and those species overlap. that's what the sightings are telling you. Okay, but you can steer me in a different direction, Scott, but I just wanted to share those points, related to both the sightings and some of the ID apps that I think have great promise. We've used them, but we also have to keep those other caveats in mind.
Definitely, and I'll try to keep echoing, the limitations of the opportunistic data along with you. But at the same time, as the density of observers increases, or we have partnerships with whale watch operators or commercial ships, like the opportunities for land or boat-based surveys, I think, are growing.
I agree, and especially the ship surveys. What our principle on the ship surveys, just so you know, where we're on cargo ships, is partly that they're a great platform, but also the main reason we were doing those surveys was to look at areas of overlap and risk of ship strikes. And the beauty of those platforms is not only are they great sighting platforms, but they're going the exact places you want the data from, which is the routes the ships are taking. So it's those kind of overlaps where, even the cargo ships that we put observers on, they're only covering a small portion of the range and not giving you a good distribution map, but they are giving you exactly the data on presence that you want related to ship strike risk. So it's like this perfect fit where their bias exactly matches with what you're wanting. and that's a program we wanted to expand. The challenges, both due to kind of, constraints that exist, both as they relate to security, space on ships, the cargo companies themselves. The only reason we pulled it off was the observer, Kirsten Flynn, that we had as one of our longtime trained biologists, and is also as a licensed 100-ton captain that has served on ships, has all the clearances, the CAT cards to get into these facilities and knows bridge protocol. And so we could sort of offer them as someone that wouldn't interfere with bridge operations on a ship, which, we were able to find that kind of nexus.
Interesting. One last question for you, John, is it's I'm only beginning to understand the app that the whale watchers are using, but my understanding is that it's not an effort-based app. It's basically an opportunistic tool for reporting individual sightings. But when you work with naturalists or others in that industry, can you talk a little bit about the protocol that you've used or software?
Yeah, no, I don't think I have a good solution, actually, Scott. Unfortunately, there has been a proliferation of sighting apps. Some of them work better than others. What some of the things we pay attention to is ability to access and download the data at the end of the trip, so it can be shared with who you want, rather than go into some central depository that may be harder to access. So that's kind of one important element I would mention.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a little bit of challenge with the Conserve.io group, which is mostly a buy hire group that pretty much, unless you're paying them, you have to go through who their client is that's developed it. So often we struggle a little bit. The whale alert and whale sightings apps that are being used and by some of the groups in California that we have historically worked with, it took a little bit to kind of work out how we could get the data out of the apps that we were getting before, before they kind of joined and went that route. I mentioned this in an email to you. We take all our data digitally on a tablet data acquisition system, but it's a running open access database with custom forms developed quite a while ago. We've been using it for 10 years, and it's really nice for taking complicated data. Our tagging data, our biopsy sampling data, our photo ID data, it has, our tracking data can all go through that. Unfortunately, it's not a great one for easy to use in a more simplistic way. And I hate to suggest that the solution is yet another app, because part of the challenge right now is along the West Coast, there are a half dozen of these that different groups have developed and are using. So it's actually it's kind of proliferated in different ways. But maybe there'll be a little shaking out that will occur on that, that will then result in kind of a consensus around a particular one and working out some of those details. But I wish I could say I had the perfect solution for that.
Yeah, I'll end this little lightning talk session with, but I totally see that happening. And I think that's one of the things I think we can probably coordinate across work groups on is the marine bird folks have their own systems. Giles was thinking about presenting a little bit more about a data collection app that she's been trying to optimize for her research. Maybe she'll talk about that a bit at the next meeting, but yeah, I think we continue to use slightly different tools for similar tasks, and there may be an opportunity to sort of standardize a bit over the next couple of years. I thank you, John, for flagging that whale alert data access was a bit of an issue, because I definitely, we're using whale alert as they are on the East Coast for community science input to this data cooperative. And the cooperative itself is in part reflects your advice that in the past it was difficult to get the data out, that So data that's flowing in through Whale Alert is going to this cooperative. And so it's now very easy to download the data that came in from those community scientists and get it back to them, either as raw data or in the future as visualizations that hopefully they'll find as valuable as people clearly love your Facebook-based posts, Monica, that start to let us all see patterns in the occurrence data and now even the track data, like the movements of particular mature lines. So I think the future looks bright.
If you don't mind, Scott, I was going to make one other just quick addition earlier that I didn't jump in on related to hydrophones and some of the hydrophones, just that while those set up by the Benioff, both now off San Francisco and in the Channel Islands, are non-directional. One exciting development we've been working with has been the Mabari hydrophone off Monterey, which is again another real-time system, but has that directionality built in. And we've actually now had cases where John Ryan down there has taken a blue whale that we had an acoustic tag deployed on and was calling, and we actually have the whole directional track of that individual based on the calls it was making and lined up with the detections from the animal. So it was a great way to sort of see the promise and aspects of that. And I think, wherever those remote hydrophone systems can have that directional component, it seems much more valuable than the ones that don't have it.
Well, now you've made me have to make one more comment, which is some of us, Jason and Val and I, were last week focusing in on a semi-annual conference called the Detection, Classification, Localization, and Density Estimation, which is all bioacousticians trying to do that type of stuff. And there were 2 talks, which are rare in these annual conferences or semi-annual ones, where it was very clear that we are moving beyond hydrophones, traditional hydrophones. So I'll just flag here this something called DAS, which is distributed acoustic sensors, and it's based on being able to measure the strain or linear stretching of a fiber optic cable when it's hit by a sound wave. So it's a totally different way of turning this pressure wave into a signal, but it was just tested off of Oregon during a maintenance period on the NSF funded regional synthesis nodes. It's basically the ocean observing cable that's going out from Newport to the spreading ridge off our coast. And they were localizing fin whales from the fiber optic cable, using the fiber optic cable as effectively an array of thousands of hydrophones with resolution along the fiber of a couple of meters. So that's part of the reason I think the future looks particularly bright for bioacoustic methods of these either getting occurrence data or tracking data. But we can talk more about that in a future call, but you made me have to flag it. So and hopefully that'll be useful to you, John, on the outer coast. Okay, so it's time to move on to the next section of the meeting. Let's make sure we're good on chat. So first order of business is to go over the draft 2022 plan. So I will walk you through that. And then I think we'll have some time to sort of get into at least reviewing who's part of the various species committees and some specific tasks we may want to start prioritizing in order to meet the goals in the plan. But let me start by bringing up the draft. So you all should be able to view it and access it. So we're using a template that PSEMP developed, and it basically is a quick assessment of what sort of progress we made in the last year. And then down at the bottom, there's a table of our plans for the year. So let me quickly go over what happened last year, despite our COVID's best efforts to derail us. We did have a winter meeting about a year ago and talked about the funding opportunities that many of us applied for, and some of us have gotten support from. We've gotten updates from Quiet Sound, which has continued to evolve and launched itself a bit more this first quarter publicly. And we interacted with and learned a bit more about the changing salmon indicators through the salmonid work group. That was basically me attending a meeting of theirs. Canceled our spring meeting due to COVID. We had a Southern Resident Killer Whale Committee or subgroup, which did a good job of making one submission to the Marine Waters Report. And then they also did a good job of updating the indicator and the vital signs. So that's both making sure that the Center for Whale Research's latest data is that reflected in that indicator of SRKW population by pod, and also tuning and adjusting the key messages, which notably started to at least talk about bigs as a prelude to developing an indicator related to their occurrence in the Puget Sound vital sign revision process. So the stage is set for that. And then we did have a fall meeting where we got to see each other and hear quite a bit about harbor seals and 2021 field work. So if you missed that, on our homepage, you'll see links to the YouTube recording. Thank you, Katrina, as well as a very nice first ever like readable synopsis of what we talked about, as opposed to my very long outlines that get notes in them. So thanks again, Katrina, for helping with that. So here's where, if you haven't had a chance to review this via the homepage or conversations with me, feel free to jump in here anytime, this verbally or in terms of the chat on Zoom with thoughts. But I know this table is a little complicated, but basically we've got objectives, related tasks, leads who are responsible for that task, expected outcomes, audience, and roles for other parts of PSEMP or the partnership. So there's not too many things here. I'm trying to admit that COVID is still around and we may not get as much accomplished as possible. So this is a bit aspirational, but for a while I've been hoping that we could do more than just one submission to the annual Marine Waters Report. I think the best we've done is 2 on Southern Resident Killer Whales and Harper porpoises. But so mostly we talk about Southern residents with that broader group. So a challenge, I think, for us would be to see if we could report out on, let's say, 3 species in some fashion, and try to use our committee's fledgling committee structure to try to generate those. So that looks like participation in the workshop, and then writing up a sort of 1-page contribution to this annual report. And then, like I mentioned, we have some ongoing responsibilities related to the Southern Resident indicators. So Lynn and Grace have historically led that the last couple of years with a lot of help from Brad and other members of the SRKW committee. So I don't foresee that being a problem. And along with that, there'll be some revisions of the vital signs as we continue to think about how to add a second indicator to that vital sign. So I think a good goal for us is in the next year to sort of begin the process of defining the methodology behind those new indicator. Actually, it's 2 indicators. It's adding to SRKW population an occupancy metric for Southern residents, and then an occupancy metric for bigs. So I think most those two things can happen through the existing committees. But there is, the other parts of the revision that are in our purview are a noise indicator within the marine waters part of the vital signs, and then what they call ancillary measures, or things that could become indicators maybe at some point, but aren't yet. And the two that were flagged were, for southern resident killer whales, additional indicators or ancillary measures related to body condition and fecundity. And so we can talk more about those, but we should definitely involve other folks who are looking at those, monitoring those parameters. So I guess that manifests as mostly the committee's working to come up with methodologies for the broader group to approve and consider. But I'm also, as I mentioned, thinking that let's call it an acoustics committee. I think might be a nice way to interact with the Marine Waters Group to help them define that noise indicator. So that's something that I can talk with Jason more about, but if anybody's interested in acoustics across marine mammals and also noise pollution, just let me know if you'd like to be part of that new committee. And yeah, then this is a long-standing goal of mine, is just try to keep thinking about other species beyond southern residents. So that could look like, I think good goal for this year would be, an update to the harbor seal information that is not currently a profile in the Encyclopedia of Puget Sound, and possibly creating a little bit of content related to humpbacks, something that Emily and I have talked about, but would happily collaborate with anybody who wanted to try to get. There's almost no information about humpbacks in the Encyclopedia of Puget Sound at the moment. So that's a thought on that data product, which is sort of species briefs or profiles for the encyclopedia. And that's also shorter treatments. I think Stephanie has done a really nice job of drafting a beluga brief, I guess I would call it, for the encyclopedia. I think it might be interesting if the gray whale committee wanted to at least think about starting to report out on like getting more information into the encyclopedia about gray whales, and at least thinking about the possible impacts of fast ferries. And then these last two are really about integration. Part of the PSEMP strategic plan that we're working through is trying to facilitate more interactions between work groups. So two ways of doing that we've been working on, and I think we should continue working on, is contextualizing these new indicators through collaborations with the salmonid work group and the forage fish work group. And then interacting with both the spatial data and modeling work groups, which are kind of just spinning up from being fairly dormant, but I think are both would be interested in talking with us about our spatial data and our interest in modeling the ecosystem. So I know that's a lot, but let me just pause for any thoughts about this scope. Are we missing anything? Do you want to opt out of any of these rows? Or yeah, any thoughts from anyone?
I just had a quick question, Scott. Hi, this is Tara, new worker recovery coordinator in Washington State. For folks I think I've met most people, but not everybody. I think in the 2021 work plan, you guys had some interim measures for SRKW. Is that now kind of being put under the vital sign revisions, like the fecundity and maybe acoustics would be considered interim measures of the indicator, or are they just going to be new vital signs? Just trying to clarify that.
Yeah, so, and please help me, Katrina and others, if I'm getting the nomenclature wrong, but the vital signs currently have an orca vital sign, right? And
yep,
it has only one indicator. So when I say key messages, I'm talking about the key messages related to the vital sign. And there's other content related to the actual indicator that we currently have based on Center for Whale Research census data. So that's indicators within a vital sign. The revision of the vital sign process has proposed 2 more indicators in this vital sign, one related to southern residents and one related to bigs, and both trying to leverage some sort of occupancy metric.
Okay, thank you.
So interim measure versus, I guess I'm a little confused about interim measure versus ancillary measure. Maybe they're the same thing, but these were flagged during the revision process as potentially interesting metrics, ones that might inform the key messages or the interpretation of these indicators, but maybe they weren't ready for full indicator status, but might be helpful in terms of contextualizing the indicators. So those were within the Orca vital sign, those were fecundity of southern resident killer whales and body condition.
Great, thank you.
And then I guess, sorry, the last piece of the puzzle is we go back to the full, whoops, that was wrong. The full vital signs. Up here is marine water quality, or it's healthy water. So and marine water quality is a complex combination of an index and dissolved oxygen currently. So one of the proposals within this vital sign was to add an indicator related to underwater noise.
Great, thanks for that clarification.
You bet. It was an excellent question. And Katrina, did I get it roughly? Like, is an ancillary measure the same as an interim measure, or does anybody have thoughts on that?
I don't know the clarification to that nuance there. But yes, you're exactly on point in terms of like the vital sign messaging and how we're trying to invigorate some additional information and components to the vital sign. With that said, that vital sign wheel that you were showing, Scott, is starting to become out of date. We're preparing to roll out a new vital sign wheel to be inclusive of the new vital sign indicators, including that marine noise component. So that will get rolled out relatively soon. I know work group leads will be discussing that at our next week's meeting. So yeah, some more detail and information to come about that down the road. But yeah, I'm not sure how to exactly answer the nuance yet between the 2 components and indicators, Scott.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think that'll be really exciting. It's a perfect prelude to us all understanding a little bit more about how the whole revision process is going to manifest.
And can I ask a question related to that? Has always been pivotal to, maybe the reason I haven't been very active in the working group has always been that kind of seeming singular focus on southern resident killer whales as the vital sign that really made both this group and things associated to the partnership not as relevant to those of us who don't study southern resident killer whales. Is there anything in these revisions or going forward that would ever become more inclusive of other marine mammals as vital signs, or is it going to always stay southern resident killer whales just because, as much as I value southern resident killer whales, it's always been a very myopic focus, if you will, as it relates to the dramatic changes we've seen in things like harbor porpoise or humpback whale occurrence, or other species and their use of the Salish Sea and Puget Sound.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely flagged that as of interest. Long-term interest of the work group was during the revision process. And the bad news is, like, I tried pretty hard on harbor seals, and the folks who monitor persistent organic pollutants in things like sediments and other parts of the ecosystem sort of said, like, that would be useful, thinking of them as seals as integrators, opportunistic feeders, and dispersed around the region, but not too dispersed. Like I tried to argue for that and failed. So I think the answer is the revision process kind of goes through a cycle, John. And I think if we were a little better prepared next time, we could make more cogent arguments to expand the scope. But there's a competition between, sharing all the monitoring information we have versus keeping the vital signs as a societal tool as, relatively simple. You could argue that it's already too complicated, but that's the sort of conversation that was happening through the process, and that led to at least having bigs be part of the picture now, but so far no other marine mammals.
And I can add on, so yes, Scott, everything that you just mentioned, I think is very accurate. It does go through sort of like this iteration. It won't surprise me in a few years if like we start thinking, if the partnership starts thinking about how to, re-update and revitalize the current vital sign system that's starting to get rolled out. There is always, I think, a lot of interest. And so part of some of the challenges that is a part of the vital sign process and trying to identify indicators too is trying to ensure that there's a source. And if there isn't a source of data that it can reliably, have as indicator leads, that's not to say that that's like the only limitation. There's certainly current indicators that aren't being supported and there's no strong data source, but that's another, those are two big questions that they consider part of the process is, yeah, again, the data source, and then, how is this gap of information going to support probably other indicator and connections across the ecosystem? Not to say that other marine mammals aren't important. I think it's just a limit of like resources at the moment to be inclusive of everything that folks would like to see. But with that said, I'll make a plug too that whenever these work groups, PSEMP work groups have an opportunity to participate in like vital sign key messages. So like Scott just showed, quickly around the southern killer whale, resident killer whale indicator and developing key messages. You all are encouraged to make those connections to like broader species or just other connections that perhaps aren't quite noted exactly in that indicator information and data. So that is another channel and avenue that folks are encouraged to utilize as another communication component. So John, if you have more questions about it, happy to connect with you. And I'm also happy to connect you with our vital sign program lead if you have anything additional that you'd like to chime in with.
Yeah, no, it's been a long-standing discussion point. Let's put it that way. So, and I could go on for quite a bit longer, and I won't.
Yeah, I definitely. I think it's an interesting conversation that we should continue. And I think this next section where we talk a little bit about the species committees, like I do see opportunities, like filling in data gaps within the Encyclopedia of Puget Sound is a pretty easy, low-cost way to surface the amazing data sets that we have, especially for harbor porpoises and harbor seals, in my opinion, and talk about them and contextualize them in compelling ways. And I think that type of data product could lead to, being better prepared in the next set of revisions to sort of understand the ecosystem and therefore help the partnership decide like how to visualize it and summarize it for broader audiences.
If this is an okay time, Scott, I was going to mention just a couple of things that sort of dovetail a little bit with the different species summaries, that I just wanted to make sure people were aware of. One is that, NOAA has in the past designated these biologically important areas for different species. And I led that for the US West Coast, but they're doing it in all US waters. And that is being revised currently, and there will be a new paper out on that. It doesn't take all marine mammal species, but it does include southern resident killer whales, humpback whales, blue whales, fin whales, gray whales, harbor porpoise, a number of species that are now being reevaluated with these biologically important areas. And those are mostly feeding areas, but sometimes migratory corridors. So that process is underway and will result in both an online, definition of those and justification along with a paper, being published. And so if anyone wants to know more about that, let me know. That's going to try to wrap up in the next 2 to 3 months. There was a paper, I don't know its current status, that the Whale Museum was looking to put together on kind of insights into several species other than killer whales, minke whales, humpback whales, gray whales, that were based on trends and the sighting data. And so a number of us were kind of having calls and discussions about that, just to say that that's something that has been trying to be put together. And also, I'm actively working on both a paper related to the sounders, gray whales, and humpback whales in the area. And so I think, to whatever degree, for at least humpbacks and gray whales, this is a particularly good time for trying to collaborate on where that overlaps with the species descriptions or other items, because I'm putting together material for that. So anyway, those were the main things I was going to just get out there.
Yeah, super. Thank you for flagging those. And yeah, I sort of see these like species briefs, 2-pagers, as a way to like begin, like create a catalyst for a future paper. And then the Encyclopedia of Puget Sound hopefully will take all of those publications, sort of distill them into, up-to-date reference lists and insights that are summarized in an encyclopedic fashion. So I think there's room for quite a bit of interpretive work, both on the initial monitoring data trends, like before you've got enough for a paper, and then afterwards distilling the literature. To me, I sort of see it as all part and parcel. But yeah, before we go into 15 minutes of trying to think a little bit more specifically, I wanted to do 2 things, which is ask officially, like, any objections to finalizing that draft 2022 plan at this point, or final comments that we should make changes to it? Okay, I will finalize that and update it on the website. The other thing I wanted to do before we move on is just continue to invite any of you or colleagues who couldn't make it today to help me co-chair this work group, or just assist. But I'm excited to keep leading for the next few years, but I want to at least start setting the stage for a transition. And so I'll repeat this obviously in upcoming years, but I'm always open to having more help. So if anybody feels like they have bandwidth, please let me know. And again, thank you to Katrina for helping so much. Many work groups have a funded coordinator, and Katrina has been doing some heavy lifting that normally would be outside of her work job description. So thank you. All right, so we have 15 minutes left. This is obviously, there's a lot of details here, and we've talked through some of this. But I think the best way to make a little incremental progress here is to actually open up this sheet and make sure that just use it as a way to visualize a couple of potential tasks. So I think I flagged this earlier, but this Marine Waters workshop is an upcoming opportunity to do this kind of integrative thinking for any particular species and to surface any insights with to get feedback from the broader PSEMP community. So I'll just emphasize that if you'd like to be part of that, like you're compelled to push forward within one of these committees, like an imminent opportunity next week is to RSVP saying you'd at least like to attend this workshop, or you'd actually like to do a very short presentation on this a species of your interest. And then the workshop itself will go off in just a few weeks on April 5th. So with that in mind, this is what the spreadsheet looks like. Let's see if you can see that. So on this left side is, I'm going to officially just call these committees because I'm tired of saying and writing subgroup. So each of these is sort of a species specific committee. This is where our historic strength has always lied, is in southern residents. But there's bigs, harbor seals, California sea lions, harbor porpoises, stellars, humpbacks, grays, minkies, dolls. And then those are all pretty well populated up to dolls. And then there's been less expertise in these other species and less activity in terms of data products. So there's different levels of commitment, like there are committee members here and lead authors, people who want to take, really focus in on the species and clock some volunteer hours related to them are listed as lead authors here. There's also folks who are just interested in proofreading content from that committee. And then prospective authors who might be interested in the future, but are not available at the moment. And then the other part of this spreadsheet is basically historic prioritization of these species, like why do we have some at the top? And this is sort of related to your question, John. And then data products, like ways in which we've generated some data products related to the monitoring info for any of these species. So we talked about briefs, which are like 2-pagers. We generated some of those in 2019. Profiles, which are on the Encyclopedia of Puget Sound. So those were updated for harbor porpoises and bigs with leads from Cindy and Monica in 2019. So those are profiles that we can share as PDFs ourselves, but they're also published within the encyclopedia. Those are linked here if you're curious to see what they look like. And then there's content, general content, like is there anything on these species within the Encyclopedia of Puget Sound? There were updates in 2012 and 2014 for harbor seals, like Joe Gatos and one of his colleagues wrote a profile for harbor seals that hasn't been updated in 8 years. So I think that's one of the reasons I'm flagging that as an opportunity. And then submissions to the Marine Waters Report. This was for the 2021 was the latest Southern resident one. But as you can see, the last contribution from harbor porpoises was in 2019. So in terms of the Marine Waters Report, like these are opportunities here, or revising what we said about harbor porpoises would be another logical thing to do. And, I guess I'll just flag that Emily is available and interested in working on some sort of report regarding humpbacks. So maybe that's we'll certainly reach out within the humpback committee about collaborating around that effort. So maybe that generates at least a 2-pager for the encyclopedia. So yeah, does anybody see errors here or want updates or have ideas about things they'd like to lead or data products that we're missing? Okay. Well, that again is a spreadsheet that anybody can comment on. So feel free to email me if you see things that should be changed, or if you'd like to volunteer in any of those roles. John, I know you attended the Marine Waters workshop last year. I missed it. Is there anybody else planning on attending this year? It sounds like not. All right, well, I have signed up for it, so I will be there. And I guess one thing I wanted to ask is if there's any issues. Sort of the way this works is like this workshop will be mostly looking at like what were the marine water conditions last year and how did the various species, fish or mammals or birds, respond to them. So maybe a good use of the last 10 minutes here is to sort of walk through each species and have folks chime in with observations from last year that you think are noteworthy in terms of changes that we've seen or trends, like emerging trends or like possible updates to status. So let's start with southern residents and Jason flagged one emerging issue, which is this apparent increase in use of the southern Strait of Georgia. Any other thoughts from folks about recent trends of status changes for southern residents?
When you say status, what do you mean, Scott? Like movement, population? I mean, there's the new study from NOAA that came out about noise that I think is important. With the Marla Holt study that showed that that females are, having quite a bit of repercussions on noise and it's impacting their foraging. And I think that's an important thing to point out.
Yep, that's a good point. Yeah, so this could be recent research results or patterns we're seeing in their movements or important changes to, fecundity, mortality, body condition. And we don't have Holly or Lance here to talk about drone observations, right? That would also be in the purview.
Well, yeah, that they would be good to connect with. I mean, they did get winter data from one of the pods that they don't normally get winter data from that showed a change in body condition from the summer, like a reduced body condition. And I think that's published on SR3's website, I think. So that would be important to note as well, I think. And of course, the 2 lost pregnancies and the birth, the calf, just watching, survival of the new calf.
Yep, getting into 2022 conditions. Yeah,
oh, true. Those are, yep. We flipped a year there.
Great. Good thoughts though, Tara. Thank you. Yeah, any thoughts on Biggs patterns, changes, updates?
We need a Biggs voice here.
It was a record year for sightings. That may not translate into overall occurrence or occupancy, depending on how we define those metrics, but at least in terms of sightings, it was a record year.
Yeah.
Sorry to go back to SRKW. I know you have plenty on them, but also just the salmon populations, looking at those too, tying those to SRKW and the declines. So looking at the state of the sound report, looking at the state of salmon report that the Governor's Salmon Recovery Office publishes. Just there's, no change in ESA listings on their prey.
Good thought. Or we can absolutely go back to any of these at any time, but thoughts on harbor porpoises?
This is Anna here. We're in year 2 of a study in Western Juan de Fuca Strait, kind of central to Western, and collecting some new habitat data for regions that were previously pretty data poor, and kind of the Port Renfrew region. So we're kind of excited to see we'll be starting up again in about 2 months for data collection. So we'll be really keen to find out what year 3 brings, to see if we're finding interannual similarities or differences in habitat usage out there.
Oh, that's exciting.
Mm-hmm. Well, they are the world's greatest small cetaceans, so I have to provide some insight.
That's what I hear.
Scott, this is Stephanie. So from the stranding perspective, we had a cluster of, I'd say maybe it was 5 neonates that washed up in the Anacortes, kind of North Island County area that we necropsied. And we didn't really find anything that was common to all of them. We thought, gosh, maybe their moms are getting picked off by bigs. But I mean, these were like brand new, like the fetal folds were still on them. They had a couple of them had nursed, a couple of them had, they all had taken breaths, so they weren't stillborn. So, but we were the only area that Anacortes / Northern Island County was the only area that really saw this uptick. And that was just at the end of August, beginning of September. So what it was caused from, we don't know, but there's still, harbor porpoise are still our most commonly stranded cetacean that we see, in the inland waters. So they, we do necropsy them all and send in histopathology, and we're Jesse and John and I, with several folks that are on this, we're working on this mucormycosis paper to try to do a qualitative risk assessment for this fungal disease, mucormycosis, that we have seen and kind of overly represented it in harbor porpoise. So that will be hopefully done by the end of April, beginning of May. So I'll report on that more when it's getting close to getting done.
Great. Obviously, there's more thoughts here, I'm sure, from many of you. Like, we have a new elephant seal, and I'm sure there are thoughts from Frankie on minkies and other thoughts about humpbacks. So feel free to add them to this document or email me, and I'll try to summarize them for the workshop attendees.
I had a quick thing for the harbor porpoises. Just recently, we have not seen harbor porpoises for a large amount of time in the last month, and this is very unusual for this time of year. So, for example, last year, 2 out of 23 days we didn't see them, and this year it's been 11 out of 23 days. So it's a very unusual absence of the animals in our study site. So we're looking into that. Not sure why.
Yeah, maybe another, this is more anecdotal at this point, but we have some staff that fly winter surveys, mostly for sea ducks. But they also, it's Joe Evenson, who has done, he's involved in some of the harbor porpoise, or did many of the aerial harbor porpoise surveys before, that had documented sort of that shift from fewer dals and more harbor porpoise. And he just said this year, I talked to him, and he said anecdotally, he felt like they saw way fewer harbor porpoise this year and more Dallas porpoise than they had for many years. So not saying we're shifting back or anything, but just an interesting little note from someone who's been up in the air a lot recently.
And I've seen that on some other sightings that I've heard of. There's been more dolls than I've noticed before, fairly common. So that's an interesting thing, that there's also that happening as well.
This is Anna here. We've been out pretty much every other week for about the last 8 weeks or so in central Juan de Fuca. And interestingly, we have not been seeing harbor porpoise in areas that I would truly expect to see them. Not a single one.
That's so interesting, because that's basically what we're seeing here. And if they are here, they're fast traveling through. They're not staying in the past like they normally do.
That's so. I was in a spot just the other day, and I thought, oh, this looks absolutely perfect. And we spent about 6 hours out there,
and nothing.
Not a single one.
Yeah.
Yet
it's really
our mainland BC study site, we had was it yesterday or the day before? We did have a few sightings very, very, very close to shore.
Interesting.
So closer than you would typically go in a boat.
Right. Like, maybe if we hide in here.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I don't know what's happening, but and there's been some larger aggregations down at Stillicom in Southern Sound and out in Lawson Reef. So I don't know if they're just all having parties somewhere that we're unaware of, but it is very strange. And makes me feel a little bit better maybe that other people are noticing it as well. And it's not just our study site that they're leaving.
There have been some larger congregations here in the San Juans too, like near Spiden and Waldron Islands. I know some of the tour boats have been seeing groups of like 30 to 50 out there.
I saw a couple, I think these are different ones, but I saw a couple posts. So that's interesting.
Fascinating. We're at time, so as much as I would love to continue this on the record, why don't we wrap this up and agree that we have committees to continue these conversations. I'll try to spur them a little bit in preparation for saying a few things at this workshop, and then we can move on and for the more interesting parts decide whether we should join Stephanie in creating a few more products for the encyclopedia. But yeah, thank you all for attending and sharing. I'm looking forward to the day when we can all meet in person again. Not going to say what will happen this spring, but maybe this fall.